Harold Martinez arrived at the office building at 5:45 in the morning, 30 minutes before his official shift began. The parking lot stretched empty around his weathered Honda Civic as he gathered his maintenance cart from the storage room. At 62, Harold moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that attention to detail prevented larger problems later. The fluorescent lights hummed to life as he made his rounds through the third floor, checking the air conditioning units that had been acting up all week. His calloused hands adjusted the thermostat settings with practiced ease. In Conference Room B, he noticed the projector bulb flickering and made a mental note to replace it before the morning meetings began. Harold had worked as the maintenance supervisor for Pinnacle Solutions for 8 years. He knew every wire, every pipe, every system in this building better than anyone else. The younger maintenance staff often came to him when they encountered problems they could not solve. By 7:15, employees began trickling in for the day. Harold nodded politely to the familiar faces, receiving brief smiles in return. Most people saw him as part of the building itself, reliable and largely invisible. At 8:30 sharp, Marcus Webb, the new vice president of operations, gathered the entire staff in the main conference room. Harold stood at the back with the other maintenance workers, wondering why they had been included in what appeared to be an important company meeting. Marcus, a sharp-suited man in his mid-30s, cleared his throat and began speaking about efficiency and modernization. His words carried the weight of corporate authority as he announced upcoming changes to streamline operations. Marcus Webb's voice cut through the conference room with corporate precision. "We are implementing immediate cost reductions to improve our bottom line," he announced, his eyes scanning the assembled employees. "Unfortunately, this means eliminating positions that no longer align with our streamlined vision." Harold felt a familiar tightness in his chest as Marcus continued speaking about efficiency metrics and redundant roles. The younger man's gaze landed directly on him as he spoke the words that Harold had been dreading. "Harold Martinez, your position as maintenance supervisor is being terminated effective immediately," Marcus stated with the detached tone of someone reading quarterly earnings. "We appreciate your years of service, but frankly, we need someone more in tune with modern operational standards." The room fell silent. Harold's co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Sarah from accounting looked genuinely upset, while Tom from IT shook his head in disbelief. Harold stood quietly, his weathered hands steady at his sides. He had survived corporate restructuring before, but never with such casual cruelty. At 62, with a disabled daughter depending on him, this felt different, more final. "You have 1 hour to collect your personal items and complete the transition documentation," Marcus added, already turning his attention to other matters. "Security will escort you out afterward." Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe situations like this happen commonly where you are from. Harold nodded once, a gesture that carried decades of dignity intact despite the humiliation. He turned and walked from the conference room, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that followed his departure. Harold sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. The cardboard box containing his few personal items rested on the passenger seat, like evidence of a life reduced to objects. His company coffee mug, a photo of Sophia at her high school graduation, and the small toolkit he had purchased with his own money years ago. The drive home took him through the familiar streets of his modest neighborhood, past the elementary school where Sophia had learned to walk again after the accident, past a pharmacy where he picked up her medications every month. Each landmark reminded him of the responsibilities that made this termination more than just a professional setback. 15 years ago, Harold had been the chief technology officer at Meridian Systems, a rising star in Silicon Valley with stock options and a corner office. Then Maria died in the car accident that also left 80-year-old Sophia with spinal injuries. The doctors said she might never walk again, but Harold knew his daughter better than that. She had her mother's determination and his stubborn refusal to accept limitations. So he had walked away from everything: the executive salary, the company car, the career trajectory that his colleagues envied. He moved to this smaller city where the cost of living allowed him to focus on what mattered most. Sophia needed physical therapy, specialized equipment, and a father who was present for every doctor's appointment and every small victory. The maintenance job at Pinnacle Solutions had been perfect. Steady income, health insurance, and hours that allowed him to be home when Sophia returned from school. He used his technical background quietly, solving problems that baffled others, but never drawing attention to his former life. Harold returned to the office the next morning to complete his transition documentation. Word had spread quickly through the building, and he found himself receiving quiet expressions of support from unexpected corners. Sarah from accounting pressed a thermos of coffee into his hands without saying a word. Tom from IT lingered by the maintenance closet, shaking his head in disgust. "This is complete garbage, Harold," Tom muttered, keeping his voice low. "You know more about the systems in this building than anyone else. Marcus is making a huge mistake." Harold appreciated the sentiment, but remained focused on his responsibilities. He spent the morning creating detailed notes about every system quirk, every maintenance schedule, every vendor contact that kept Pinnacle Solutions running smoothly. His replacement would be Danny Torres, a 24-year-old with enthusiasm but limited experience. Danny arrived at 10:30, eager but clearly overwhelmed by the scope of responsibilities he was inheriting. Harold walked him through the building methodically, explaining the temperamental boiler in the basement, the electrical panel that occasionally tripped during thunderstorms, and the network servers that required specific temperature and humidity levels. "The main server room is critical," Harold explained, showing Danny the monitoring systems. "These machines handle all the company data, client files, and communication systems. If the temperature rises above 72 degrees or the humidity drops below 40%, you need to call the vendor immediately." Danny nodded rapidly, scribbling notes that Harold suspected would be illegible later. The young man's confidence seemed to diminish with each new system Harold explained. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb strutted through the office, clearly pleased with his cost-cutting measure. He spoke loudly about modernization and efficiency to anyone who would listen, seemingly oblivious to the concerned glances his employees exchanged behind his back. 3 weeks into unemployment, Harold had submitted 47 job applications and received 3 interviews. Each meeting followed the same dispiriting pattern. The interviewer would review his resume with initial interest, then look up to see his gray hair and lined face. Their enthusiasm would visibly deflate as they made polite comments about being overqualified or finding a better cultural fit. At the kitchen table, Sophia watched her father close his laptop after another rejection email. She maneuvered her wheelchair closer, her dark eyes filled with the same determination that had carried her through years of physical therapy. "Dad, you taught me that setbacks are just setups for comebacks," she said, reaching for his weathered hand. "Remember when the doctors said I would never walk to receive my diploma? You never gave up on me." Harold squeezed her fingers gently. Sophia had indeed walked across that graduation stage, using forearm crutches but walking nonetheless. Her strength always amazed him. Meanwhile, at Pinnacle Solutions, small cracks were beginning to show. The air conditioning system that Harold had carefully maintained developed an intermittent fault that left the executive offices uncomfortably warm. Danny Torres called the service company 3 times, but they could not replicate the problem during their visits. The server room temperature fluctuated unexpectedly, triggering automated warnings that Danny dismissed as false alarms. He had not yet learned to distinguish between the normal operational sounds and the subtle changes that Harold would have recognized immediately as signs of impending failure. Marcus Webb, focused on preparing quarterly reports that would showcase his cost-saving initiatives, remained oblivious to these minor technical issues developing throughout the building. The problems at Pinnacle Solutions escalated from minor inconveniences to genuine concerns. The elevator began stopping between floors for 30-second intervals that left passengers trapped and anxious. Danny called the service company, but they found nothing wrong during their inspection. In the server room, the backup cooling system failed to activate when the primary unit cycled off for routine maintenance. Danny noticed the temperature alarm, but assumed it was another false reading. By the time he investigated, The servers had been running hot for 6 hours. Tom from IT approached Danny with growing frustration. The network has been running slower all week, and now we are getting intermittent connectivity issues, he explained. Did Harold leave any documentation about server optimization? Danny shuffled through the extensive notes Harold had provided, but the technical details seemed overwhelming. Harold had written everything down, but understanding his systematic approach to maintaining the complex infrastructure required experience that Danny simply did not possess yet. Marcus Webb remained focused on the upcoming presentation to Meridian Industries, the largest potential client in company history. The contract would be worth $12 million over 3 years, enough to secure his promotion to senior vice president. He had spent weeks perfecting his presentation, coordinating with the marketing team, and ensuring every detail impressed the visiting executives. The irony that Meridian Industries was Harold's former company escaped Marcus entirely. Harold had helped build the software systems that Pinnacle Solutions now hoped to integrate with their services, but that information existed only in Harold's unspoken knowledge of the industry connections that had brought this opportunity to their attention. Monday morning arrived with the promise of triumph for Marcus Webb. The Meridian Industries executives were scheduled to arrive at 10 o'clock for the presentation that would secure his career advancement. He had rehearsed every slide, anticipated every question, and coordinated every detail to perfection. At 7:15, Danny Torres arrived to find the server room in chaos. Red warning lights flashed across multiple monitoring panels, while alarm beeps echoed through the basement corridors. The primary server had overheated during the night, triggering an automatic shutdown that cascaded through the entire network infrastructure. Danny frantically called the emergency service line, but the earliest technician availability was noon. He tried restarting systems following the procedures Harold had documented, but each attempt resulted in new error messages that made no sense to him. By 8:30, employees began arriving to find their computers displaying network connectivity errors. Email servers were offline, shared drives were inaccessible, and the presentation files Marcus needed were trapped in the digital equivalent of a collapsed building. Marcus stormed through the office demanding answers that no one could provide. "The presentation is in 90 minutes, he shouted at Danny, who stood pale and trembling beside the failed equipment. "Fix this immediately or you are fired." Tom from IT joined the crisis response, but even his advanced technical knowledge could not penetrate the complex web of interdependent systems that Harold had maintained through years of careful attention. The servers required someone who understood not just their individual functions, but their delicate relationships with power systems, cooling networks, and backup protocols. As 9 o'clock approached, Marcus faced the unthinkable prospect of canceling the most important presentation in company history. Panic spread through Pinnacle Solutions like wildfire as 9:30 approached. Marcus frantically dialed emergency IT services across the city, but every company quoted minimum response times that would extend well past the client meeting. The Meridian Industries executives were already en route from the airport. In the server room, Tom and Danny stared helplessly at screens filled with error codes that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. They had tried every restart procedure, checked every cable connection, and consulted every manual, but the systems remained stubbornly offline. Catherine Reynolds, the company's CEO, arrived to assess the crisis personally. Her calm exterior barely concealed the gravity of the situation. Losing this contract would mean layoffs, possibly including her own position if the board lost confidence in her leadership. What about external consultants? She asked Marcus, who was visibly sweating despite the building's air conditioning. "The earliest anyone can get here is 2 o'clock, Marcus replied, his voice cracking with stress. The presentation was supposed to start in 30 minutes. Sarah from accounting appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from running up the stairs. She had been watching the crisis unfold with growing frustration, remembering how smoothly everything had operated under Harold's careful attention. "What about calling Harold?" she suggested quietly. He knew these systems better than anyone else. Marcus's face darkened with indignation. "Absolutely not," he snapped. I will not admit that firing him was a mistake. We can handle this ourselves. But as the minutes ticked away and the systems remained dead, even Marcus began to realize that his pride might cost the company everything. Catherine Reynolds studied his face carefully, recognizing the desperation behind his stubborn refusal to acknowledge the obvious solution. At 9:45, with the Meridian executives arriving in the parking lot, Catherine Reynolds made the executive decision that Marcus could not. She called Harold herself. "Harold, we have a critical system failure and need your help immediately," she said without preamble. "I know the circumstances of your departure were unfortunate, but right now you are our only option." Harold arrived within 20 minutes, still wearing the casual clothes he had put on for another day of job hunting. He walked directly to the server room where Danny, Tom, and a small crowd of anxious employees had gathered around the failed equipment. Without speaking, Harold began his assessment. His experienced hands moved across the monitoring panels while his eyes scanned the error displays with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had identified the cascade of failures that had brought down the entire network. The primary cooling system failed because the humidity sensors were not calibrated correctly, he explained to the fascinated audience. When the backup system tried to compensate, it overloaded the power distribution unit, which triggered the automated shutdown protocols. "But how do you know all this?" Tom asked, amazed by Harold's immediate diagnosis of problems that had baffled him for hours. Harold paused in his work, then spoke quietly. "I was the chief technology officer at Meridian Industries for 12 years before I came here. I helped design some of the systems architecture that your presentation is supposed to integrate with today." The room fell silent as Harold's words sank in. Danny stared in disbelief, while Tom shook his head in amazement. Even Marcus, who had reluctantly joined the group, looked stunned by this revelation. Harold returned his attention to the servers, his fingers dancing across keyboards with the confidence of someone who had built enterprise systems from the ground up. Harold worked with surgical precision, bypassing failed components and rerouting network traffic through backup systems that Danny had not even known existed. His decades of experience showed in every keystroke as he rebuilt the digital infrastructure from the ground up. "The servers are coming back online now," he announced, watching as green lights began replacing the red warning indicators. "Email services will be restored in 3 minutes, and all presentation files should be accessible within 5. True to his prediction, computers throughout the building began reconnecting to the network. Employees cheered as their screens displayed the familiar desktop icons that had been missing all morning. Catherine Reynolds watched Harold work with growing admiration. When the systems were fully operational, she approached him privately while Marcus stood frozen in stunned silence. "Harold, I need to understand something," she said quietly. "If you have this level of expertise, why were you working in maintenance?" Harold's expression softened as he explained about Maria's death and Sophia's needs. "I chose to be present for my daughter rather than chase corporate advancement," he said simply. "The maintenance position gave me steady income with flexible hours. I could be home when Sophia returned from school and attend her medical appointments." Meanwhile, the Meridian Industries executives had arrived and were being escorted to the conference room by Marcus, who was struggling to regain his composure. The presentation proceeded flawlessly, with all technical demonstrations working perfectly thanks to Harold's intervention. During the meeting, Harold quietly slipped away, assuming his emergency assistance was complete. But Catherine Reynolds had been thinking carefully about what she had witnessed and what it meant for her company's future. The Meridian Industries presentation exceeded every expectation. The executives were impressed not only by the technical demonstrations that Harold had made possible, but by the seamless integration concepts that leveraged systems architecture Harold himself had originally designed years earlier. After the clients departed with promises to finalize the $12 million contract within the week, Catherine Reynolds found Harold in the parking lot preparing to leave. She asked him to join her in her office for a private conversation. "Harold, I need to know more about your background," she said, closing the door behind them. "Tom showed me some research about your tenure at Meridian. You were not just a CTO. You were instrumental in developing the enterprise software platforms that half the Fortune 500 companies still use today. Harold nodded quietly, uncomfortable with the attention his past achievements were receiving. Why did no one here know about your qualifications? Catherine continued. Your employment file lists only basic maintenance certifications. I never mentioned my previous career because it was not relevant to the position I was hired for, Harold replied. I came here to be a maintenance supervisor, and I tried to be the best one I could be. Meanwhile, word had spread throughout the office about Harold's role in saving the presentation. Employees gathered in small groups, discussing how Marcus had fired the one person who could have prevented the crisis entirely. The consensus was unanimous and damaging to Marcus's credibility. Marcus himself sat in his office, the reality of his catastrophic judgment slowly sinking in. He had terminated a former technology executive whose expertise had just saved the company's most important contract. His cost-cutting triumph had become a monument to his incompetence, witnessed by every employee and the CEO herself. 1 week later, Catherine Reynolds called Harold with an offer that would change everything. She proposed creating a senior technology consultant position specifically designed around his expertise and family responsibilities. The role would involve strategic planning, system architecture, and mentoring, with flexible hours that respected his priorities as a single father. The salary was triple what he had earned in maintenance, with full benefits and the respect his knowledge deserved. Harold accepted gratefully, understanding that this opportunity would secure Sophia's future while allowing him to contribute meaningfully to the company's growth. Marcus Webb received his transfer notice the same day. The board had lost confidence in his judgment after learning how his cost-cutting decision had nearly destroyed their biggest contract opportunity. His new position was at a smaller branch office with significantly reduced responsibilities and no path to advancement. On Harold's first day in his new role, Sophia accompanied him to the office to see where her father would be working. She moved confidently on her forearm crutches, her pride in Harold evident to everyone who met her. Danny Torres, who had been promoted to head maintenance supervisor with Harold's recommendation, approached them with genuine gratitude. Thank you for believing I could learn from my mistakes, he said. Harold had spent hours training him properly, sharing the institutional knowledge that made complex systems manageable. As Harold settled into his new office with its view of the city skyline, he reflected on the unexpected turns that had brought him here. Sometimes the longest detours lead to the destinations we were meant to reach. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or if you have witnessed similar hidden talents in someone you know. Thank you for watching.